if they've gone to Overton Park and been over there by the golf house before you go into the park for a walk, you see all those concrete streams. You know, you can look down the bridge and just see them down there. They come across Poplar. That's Lick Creek. And so I'm trying to think of where to start with this. First, to get a sense, I do have a PowerPoint, but it's not really a PowerPoint because I didn't know where you guys wanted to start. If you're thinking of the area as a geographic area, you need, and you're thinking about Cypress Creek, you just need to think about how water impacts urban development, and how it defines where areas get built. So if you think of Memphis, and just don't even look at the houses, just think of it as an open piece of land. Let's see, what were we? 1818 is when the city was developed. That's when the three founders bought the land and said, oh, we're going to put a city here. There wasn't anything here except forests and the bluff and the Mississippi River and whatever creeks and streams were flowing into that Mississippi River. So the development that took place based on that geographic definition. Usually neighborhoods were built in high areas above the floodplain. Native Americans coming through this way. If you look at a map of Memphis, and I should have put one up for you, you'll see that Poplar, Union, Lamar, Jackson come out from the Mississippi River in almost like a fan shape, and they go east. Those were high roads. Those were roads that before even Native Americans were here, the animals took to come up and over to the Mississippi. Then Native Americans took those same paths. When we came in as a city and built ourselves, and you look at a map, get a city map, that's when you see what's called a grid. You know, we're talking city planning. That's where you see streets going north and south, streets going east and west, and they're cutting across these funny fan-shaped streets. Lamar came up from Mississippi. Union and Poplar came from what we consider East Memphis now. Jackson was up to Raleigh. Those were all old either Indian trails or animal trails that were bringing up to the Mississippi River. And then we as humans and the white folks that came in here and built the city, built it around those roads. And the first places that we built were on the highest ground. So down closer to downtown, along the bluff. And then going east, out Poplar, out Lamar, out Union. We went out Jackson a little, but we did not go out north to where Cypress Creek is. Prior to World War II, the only road going north was 3rd Street up to Millington. Watkins or Cleveland stopped at Cypress Creek. So that area was inundated with a natural system of waters. Let me see if I can do this for you. I don't know. I'll just tell you that it was a natural set of waters, and Cypress Creek, it's like I said, it's the north part of our neighborhood, and Lick Creek is coming up from the south through our neighborhood, through Overton Park, past Snowden School, through the neighborhood, and it connects with Cypress, and then Cypress into the Wolf, and then the Wolf into the Mississippi. And that whole area north where you're looking was very much impacted by lots of water. You also have the Loosahatchee if you get up to Fraser. So you've got Cypress and the Loosahatchee and the Wolf, and they're that whole area. So it explains why, you know, you don't see development in that area until almost around World War II, because they had to get flooding under control. Memphis, and you've probably all heard about this, had, you know, was a part of the big 1920s. There were 2 floods. And in response to that 2 big floods, and if you want to have fun, just go into your Google and type Memphis Floods I think it's 1923, 1927. There were 2 big ones. And you'll get all these glorious pictures of streets that you're familiar with totally underwater, all downtown, all of what's now called Uptown. And they came in with the Corps of Engineers came in with a plan to control flooding all along the Mississippi. We were just part of it. I mean, it went all the way down to New Orleans and was as far up past St. Louis. And that area that you're looking at has floodgates. Have you found the floodgates? Anybody found the floodgates? They're right on Chelsea.
I was just gonna say we took a video of that right at Chelsea and Watkins. There's a floodgate that runs down.
Right, and if you go down Chelsea, you'll see a number of them. If you go north of Chelsea to the neighborhood that's called Hyde Park, you will see the levee. Did you find the levee? The levee is before you get to Kilowatt Lake, and it's all in that area.
Oh yeah, actually off of McLean.
Yes, back up in there.
Yeah, I actually fell trying to get close to that lake. You can't hardly get near that lake. It's
okay, but you can see the levee. Yeah. Hyde Park is literally in a bucket. It's in a bucket behind the levee. Okay, that levee wasn't built until after the flooding of the 30s. So those homes came in later, and if you look at those homes, they're early 1950s up through the 60s. The older neighborhood out there is Douglas Bungalow Crump. And that's because it's at a higher level and they could build in the 20s. And they did. But Hyde Park, Hollywood, those little pockets are 30s and 40s and 50s. Well, actually 40s and 50s, because they had to get flooding under control first. So water really impacts and defines that area. The other thing that defines that area is, you know, and I'm sure you've seen, is industry, right? There's a lot of either active or remains of what was industrial. There was a Firestone plant up there. I think there was a Ford plant up there. There was International Harvester. And part of the reason they were located there, this goes back to water and highlands and lowlands, that was, housing always gets prime real estate. You know, people aren't going to build their houses in a bucket if they don't have to. They're going to put themselves where they're free of flooding. Industry comes in later and usually takes up the less desirable land, the land that might be impacted by water, or that it's not easy to get access to. In this case, remember, the only road going north was 3rd. So, and then also back before we understood pollution, they would put factories near water sources so they could clean their equipment, clean, you know, run stuff through it. So Cypress Creek has Velsicol, Buckman, Buckeye. It has, you know, 4 very large industrial complexes. Buckman is closest up on McLean, I think. I think they're McLean. Velsicol And Plow and Buckeye are along Cypress Creek as you go east on Jackson. And Cypress Creek is coming around there. And then where Quaker and a few others up by Douglas, Bungalow, Crump, that's Workman's Bayou. That's another area of water that feeds into the Wolf, but also industry was developed up there. So that was just typical of urban development. Put yourself, industry would take probably the less desirable land. Also land accessible to water for, like I said, for either water sources to work their industry or to dispose of their and clean their. And that wasn't, I wouldn't say it was intentionally nefarious and evil. I would say it was ignorance. But then it may have eventually continued knowing well what they were doing to the environment. But that's neither here nor there now. A lot of that stuff is gone. Buckman's up there. I think Plow might still be there, but under another name. Buckeye's gone. I don't know if Quaker's still there or not. I think they are.
I think Buckman,
So
Plow is Merck, right? Or was Merck?
what?
Is Plow's where Merck used to be?
Okay, they changed names, right? They got bought by somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. So you get the sense of how those communities, developed. The other thing about that whole area that makes it difficult is it's heavily regulated by a lot of agencies. Corps of Engineers is all over that with the Jadwin floodplain. I mean, it was designed, you guys are probably too young, but your teacher isn't. What is it, 2011, when we had the Mississippi River rose, and it was a flood. There's two kinds of flooding too. I mean, I could go on forever, but there are two kinds of flooding. There's what's called flash flooding, heavy rain, bam, tons of water come, and all of a sudden you can't walk across the parking lot at the Walmart. You're getting your feet wet. Then there's the kind of flooding that took place in 2011, which is a slow, gradual filling up of the rivers as the water drains. And in our case with the Mississippi drains almost 3/4 of the United States. So if there is a heavy snowfall in Minnesota and in the mountains of the West, it will slowly melt, work its way down the Missouri and into the Mississippi, or into the Ohio and into the Mississippi. And you'll start hearing about people in Missouri having problems with flooding before it gets to us. And slowly and slowly and slowly. So we were July of that year, I think, when the river crested in 2011. And I would drive up there and look and see, because that whole area that you're studying is designed to take the backwater. It is designed to be, it's called the Jadwin floodplain. It is designed to relieve the water off of the Mississippi. There's two ways that engineers think of controlling the water. One is keep it in its bank, build a levee, make the river stay where it's supposed to stay. The other is, it's going to flood, let it go out across the land in a slow way and absorb down into the soil. And then eventually the flooding will stop and the river will recede back into its banks. And so the Jadwin floodplain is that second one. It's the allowing it to go out. If it gets really bad, that's where those floodgates come in place. And those floodgates were built in the 30s, and they were only used once since then, 2011. And they actually could find them. I mean, what city stores floodgates for all those years and actually can go find them? They found them and they put them in place. The levee also protected the people in that Hyde Park area. Now, some of the people that were in the trailer park that is no longer there, but is adjacent to the bus barn, you'll see it when you go north on Watkins to the west. There's abandoned remnants of it that flooded. because there was no protection there for it. And it probably should never have been built, but it was. There was also a trailer park up in Fraser that had the same experience. So what you're looking at is an area that was industrialized, that had pollution because of that industrialization, and an area that is heavily impacted by water all around it. The creeks and streams are no longer natural. And that's a whole nother story to talk about in terms of Memphis. And I'll say this one thing, and if you can keep this in mind, it'll make sense to you. We do not drink our water from our creeks and streams. Where do we get our water, guys? Somebody.
Aquifer.
Where?
The aquifer.
The aquifer.
Oh, they're saying it in the classroom. You don't hear them. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Aquifer. And what that means is that water is deep, 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 deep under the ground. It's taken 500 years to purify itself. It is clean, crystal clear, beautiful water. We are not like the folks in Chicago who have to get their water out of Lake Michigan. We are not like the folks in New Orleans who get their water out of the Mississippi. We are not like the people in Florida that get it from wells that are heavily impacted by the fact that they're right along the seashore and they have a high, high water table. It's not the Chesapeake where we're drinking from the Chesapeake. We're getting our pure water from deep under the ground. So we do not have to clean our rivers and streams to drink them. So we don't care. We let whatever gets in it, get in it, go to the Mississippi, and folks in Jackson and Natchez and Vicksburg get to clean it and drink it. It is one of the key reasons we really don't look at our creeks and streams as an asset or as something that we need to protect or use in a natural way. Most of our creeks and streams in Memphis, all of you visualize, you've all probably been to La Baguette, gotten yourself a sweet treat. Look over there at East High, and there's a big concrete culvert or ditch. That's Cypress Creek, guys.
I did not know that.
Yep, that's Cypress Creek. Cypress Creek starts in Orange Mound. It comes north through Chickasaw Gardens, where it is somewhat naturalized and there's a lake and stuff in there and a park, but it's still all concrete. Then it dives under Poplar, goes along East High there, concrete, 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 dives again, goes up and is behind what used to be Cypress Junior High. Where did it get its name? Cypress Creek. Now it's, I think, Kip Academy. And it's still concrete, concrete, concrete. And then when you get to Evergreen and you look west, it's not concrete anymore. Anybody know why? What was I calling that? The Jadwin floodplain. That's why. Corps of Engineers, you can't, it's supposed to take water. It's supposed to be an open field. It's supposed to be able to suck a lot of water when the Mississippi backs up. So that's the only place that it's natural. Along the back of Edwards and the back of what the Kip Academy, it was natural in the up to about the early 70s. And then in our desire to make things look clean, the neighborhood really pushed hard to get the concrete walls up. They wanted that. They felt they were being shortchanged by having an open creek like that. And of course it did flood some, but they channel lined it. And that's called vertical wall channel lining, straight walls like this. And when you vertical wall channel line a creek, it's dead. Now the water no longer can breathe in it. Because one, it has no base, so it's not It's none of the water is going back into the soil or cleaning itself. Two, it's out to the sun and it gets too warm, can't cool itself. Cypress Creek, there are two kinds of water systems or water creeks, if rivers. There's something called perennial, which is what the Mississippi River is perennial. Every year, it's always there. There's always water in it. Cypress Creek is perennial. There is always water in it. It is a perennial. There are things that are called ephemeral or annual creeks, which if you're in Overton Park, or you go to any natural, up to Shelby Forest, in the heavy rain seasons, there are small creeks and riverlets that are carrying water across the land to the nearest perennial creek or stream, and they go away, they dry up. Well, we have channel lined both our annual, the ones that are just seasonal, just carry water when it's raining hard in the spring and the winter, and we have channel lined our perennial creeks and streams. They're all hardscaped. And that's what engineers call it, hardscape. They think of our creeks and streams as a plumbing system. Just get that water out of there and let's move it on. Get it away from the houses. Nobody wants to get flooded. Water's a problem. Put a gutter on your house. Get that water away from your base of your house. Water's your enemy. It's not your enemy, and we're beginning to think the other way. But we have for so long viewed it that way, and viewed the fact that the way we should do water management is to get it away, to move it out. Little known fact, or maybe you guys know this and you remember it from 5th grade, you're drinking the same water the dinosaurs drank. It's a closed system. Our water, falls from the sky as rain, goes into the soil, evaporates. Bless our Memphis summer humidity. The evaporation, that's what's going on. That's all that humidity in the air. Goes back up into the cloud, rains again. It goes in a circle. What we have done as humans is what used to go like this, now goes like this. And that's why we have the flash flooding. We've put so much concrete in our way, so much hardscape, streets, roofs. We build an entertainment area at Overton Square and we concrete it. It's all concrete. Get to go listen to a band on concrete. So we have just sped that water cycle up. And a neighborhood like the one you're looking at is kind of in a catch-22 of all of those human interventions. Now, here's the one that's the hardest for you, is you've probably in your work looked at the Hollywood Superfund site, yes?
Oh,
You know
I have
it's
not.
there?
No, I have not looked at that.
Okay. The Hollywood Superfund site is at the Wolf River and Hollywood. Back in the 80s, when the Clean Water Act was put in place in the 70s, we started looking at these areas that had been impacted by industry and pollution and trying to figure out what we were supposed to do. And the federal government would come in at the behest of a local community or the city and look and test. And if they found areas they thought were heavily impacted, they would declare them a Superfund site. And then they would try to find who the polluters were and get it cleaned up so that they could put the land back into healthy use. Hollywood is a Superfund site. I do not know where it is in its process, of being cleaned up. But what happened with that was then we went into an era of pulling back from that, and we gave the authority to declare stuff to local government. So what would happen is somebody might say, "Ooh, Cypress Creek over there by Buckman and Velsicol, that's probably a Superfund site." And they would ask the city, and the city would say, "Nah, we don't want to look into it." And so it is a Superfund site, probably. So it is not reclaimable in a simple sense. You can't go plant sunflowers out there and take up the toxins and get to reuse it. There is a ghost, I call it a ghost bike trail that runs along Cypress, starts at about Watkins and runs almost, it ran all the way along it to the KIPP Academy. Well, no sooner did they put it in than did they realize that they had put it in an area that is environmentally compromised. So it got closed. But the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing.
So I have a question. So you're saying that they cannot legally at all clean that area because it's been declared beyond repair? Is that the assumption?
It's not, no, it's that nobody will, no, okay. Nobody, and when I say nobody, the state, the city, the industries along there, it's like a party and nobody's in charge, okay? Somebody would have to say, we're going to do something about this. And the problem with the way Superfund sites are set up right now, and maybe somebody could do some research and figure that out, is the local government is the person who would start the party. And part of the problem is where the bus barn is, let me go back a little bit with history, where the bus barn is a landfill. The bus barn is sitting on a landfill that existed from the turn of the century until right after World War II. There was an incinerator at Cypress Creek about where Chelsea and Watkins go together. And they closed it and opened that up, built the road, went on up to Fraser, to James Road, and built housing in there. Okay. But that's an incinerator. So you've got that. Then if you go down, you've got Buckman. And you go a little bit further to the west, you've got Velsicol. To the east, you've got Velsicol and Buckman. So you have contributors. The city is a contributor. Buckman's a contributor. Buckeye, Plow, Velsicol. Velsicol doesn't exist. They went bankrupt. So you have all of these contributors, and somebody would have to be in charge to say they want to do something about it. And my understanding of the way the law is, it would have to be the city, and they're a contributor because of the because of the incinerator and because of the landfill. Another fun thing would be to interview, if they would talk to you, is the bus barn people, because they're starting to sink.
Right.
They're starting to have structural problems with the building because it's on a landfill. Now, remember, I said this is a floodplain, right? So that water comes in, fills up and washes all across that whole plain. Then it goes back, then it comes back, then it goes back. And in 2011 was an extreme example, but every spring, that whole area out there by Chelsea, before the interstate, going east up to Watkins fills. It just fills up. It looks like a beautiful lake. And that's an intentional use of that water. It's an intentional retention of water, detention and retention of water.
Can I ask you a question? So
Sure.
If you go down Levee Road and you go under the interstate, that whole area floods, and then you go up to 51, that way, that area tends to flood. So is that right? Okay.
Yeah, and it's all intentional. One of the things, bless their hearts, they got all that FEMA money up along the other side of the interstate, and they're madly trying to not let Rodney Baber Park flood, and it should flood. It was designed to flood. It was supposed to flood, and it flooded seasonally so that you weren't playing baseball when it was flooded. And now they're trying not to let it flood. And I am going to be curious to see what the consequences are.
Yeah, that's the park on James Road that used to be
Right,
baseball diamonds, and now it looks like all the grasses are growing up because I used to play baseball, a
right.
T-ball back there, and now it's like
Yep.
you can't do that now. That's right on the interstate of James Road and the interstate.
Right,
Okay,
right.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and it was designed and intention to do that. And then of course people, remember, they think water is the enemy instead of planning with the idea that water does have to do something in a natural way and working with it, they work against it. So keep that in mind when you're thinking of some of your strategies. Don't think of the water as your enemy. Think of it to plan what you want to do in a natural way, in a way that works with it. Take advantage of the fact that it's a floodplain. But back to cleaning it up, I don't know what your answers would be. I can send you the links to the TDAC person, Jolene, who is the woman who is in charge of the water quality and the permits that the city operates under. And you might be fun to talk to her and educate yourselves about what can and couldn't be done. There might be some stuff that could be done. The other is the city of Memphis has a division called Stormwater Management. And they have a woman, she's the engineer, in charge. And the city, all cities after the Clean Water Act operate under two permits. They operate under a permit that is for your stormwater, your rainwater, and where it goes and how you manage it and what do you do with it. And then there's a permit that deals with our dirty water. What happens to that water when you flush the toilet? What happens to the water when you wash your clothes? That's dirty water. It has to be cleaned. We are not in the 18th century. We do not throw our slop pots out into the Mississippi. We clean that toilet water and then send it to the Mississippi. So there are two permits, and talking to those people, particularly the stormwater people, because most of what you're dealing with in the area that you're looking at is, I'll use the terms intermittently, stormwater and surface water. Those are the waters that do not get treated. Stormwater is the rain, but it then goes into a creek and it becomes a surface water. It
So I
becomes
have
your
a
creek or
question
stream.
from a student right now. Sorry, excuse me. That
That's okay.
they're asking like, so they didn't think about like the fact that where their water was going after they wash their clothes or even the waste. So they were asking like, where does the water go?
Okay, it goes right there. You're actually looking at one of the treatment plants in your planning area. The treatment plant up there on the other side of the bus barn. There's a treatment plant up there. So we have two treatment plants. One of the things to kind of know is that engineers didn't reinvent where water goes. They just followed it. So our dirty water and our storm water run right next to each other in separate pipes. When you get to the treatment plant, those treatment plants are next to two large river tributaries. So the Wolf River in the North Memphis and Nankana down south. So there's two treatment plants for the city of Memphis for our dirty water. One is in North Memphis and one is in South Memphis, and they're right adjacent because eventually that water is going to go into the Wolf and out to the Mississippi.
So the North Memphis one is the one near Mud Island, correct?
Yes.
Between the Tyler DeWitt Airport and Mud Island.
I think so. Yes, I think that's it. Okay.
Okay.
And we're very lucky in that we actually have what's called a separate system. If you go to Boston, think of cities that were built in the 1700s and the 1800s. They had one pipe. So when it rained, water went into that pipe. When you flushed the toilet, water went into that pipe. So they were cleaning both their rainwater and their dirty water. As populations grew, they overwhelmed their system. And now that's a whole nother conversation, but we have separate. So we were ahead of the game. And the reason we have separate, yellow fever. We came in here in the late 1800s and we put in, it's the Waring, and there's a road called Waring, and he was a sanitary engineer, and he was ahead of the game, and he put in separate system for Memphis. So when we so our dirty water went one place and our storm water went another. And that did help us greatly. We were more afraid of mosquitoes and yellow fever than we were of sanitary water, because mosquitoes almost did this. Well, it bankrupted the city. So our water is clean. Now, the city was sued by a couple of groups back about 4 years ago. They're almost getting out of the lawsuit now, because the water they were cleaning when it came out was all bubbly and had lots of effluent in it. And they were made to clean that up. The other problem they have, and you do have this problem in the area you're studying, is that, remember, it's a lower area, and it's got all that water in it. It's got all that surface water in it. And if you look out across that floodplain, you're going to see these stacks, these funny looking mushroom concrete stacks. They look pipes sticking up like that. Well, those are the vent stacks for, I think, the sanitary water,
Right,
the dirty water.
They are. We
Okay.
showed that to them. They said the pumping station, the North Cypress Creek pumping station, there is a sanitary sewer that sits above right next to the houses.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens is, when it rains or when it floods back, the water will cover those pipes and fill the sanitary sewer line with rainwater, and it will then commingle, and you will have sections. I've seen pictures in Hyde Park and in some of the areas where the drain in the middle of the street is spewing water up out of it, but it's not clean water. It's commingled water. And it's one of the reasons in 2011, North Memphis smelled like a toilet. Okay. And it was because it commingled and it came up. If it's an infrastructure problem, it's not uncommon. We tend to, you're hearing a lot of talk right now, at the federal level about improving a federal infrastructure. We tend to build things and then just not think about ever taking care of them. So we built our sanitary pipes, we built our stormwater pipes, but now they're 80 years old, they're 100 years old. Okay. So that's where we are. I mean, this is like a big ball of yarn, and you can pull a string here and you can pull a string here. It's not an easy fix. It's a lot of things. So I don't know if I've confused you or helped you or
You
what.
just opened my eyes to the fact that there's so much history here as well. And I knew that, but it's like, I was just thinking, like, where can you find this information at? And I know we don't use the library enough. We don't use the library enough. And, I'm wondering, like, if we could even, like, if there's a book out there with this information in there, because like it's so much, it's so layered. And like, if you are going to tackle this area, you need to understand the history and what's currently happening and the water flow and the natural.
Well, there's a couple of things you could do. You could, one, talk to some of your community leaders out there. Sarah Carpenter is Hyde Park. She's been there forever. She's with, there's a nonprofit that does funding for small neighborhood projects. And I'm having a senior moment. Sarah Carpenter, okay? I want to say Jif, but that's not right.
Okay.
And get the history of Hyde Park. The same thing with Douglas Bungalow Crump. They were a neighborhood that is African-American, built by and built for during the Depression. And they're very proud of the fact that Eleanor Roosevelt came out there during the Depression to see their canning factory. So there's a history there. Remember, and I don't know how to I wouldn't begin to know how to tell people what to do with this, but remember, we were a segregated city intentionally. Let's put it that way. We're still segregated, but intentionally up until the early 70s. So housing patterns, even housing material, what a house was built out of. So that impacts communities. How they were originally built tells you how long they're going to last. It's kind of like the three little pigs: the wood house, the straw house, and the wood house. Which one ends up lasting
That's why,
over
like
time.
Parkway, Central Gardens, you have a certain type of housing structure, and then you go back into where it was traditionally like Black and brown people in this area. It's like,
It changes. There were Black and brown wealthy neighborhoods, and the same thing. They were well-built homes, but yes.
But oftentimes burned down, and sometimes, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's the same. Not only that, but the plumbing, the size of the lot. If you want to have fun, pull up a plat map of a neighborhood that's adjacent to two neighborhoods that you would know would be different, that you would think of historically more affluent and historically African American or brown, and just look at the lot size. The lot size was 30 by 90 in a historically African American neighborhood, and even a working class white neighborhood was 50 by 110. So you just look at the plat map, you can see that. So we were institutionally in this city, and coming back out of that, I don't know, but certainly starting with the regulators, and I'll send you, Ms. Wallace, did you send me an email?
I did, yep. And I just emailed you. I just searched your email again, and I noticed you're also a part of the Gardener group, the Memphis area Master Gardeners.
Master Gardeners, yeah.
Yes. So I just saw that, and you had a scholarship thing that you sent out to us.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Yeah, I got it. I was like, oh, wait a minute, I've got your email here as well on something else. So.
Right, and we've already passed that, but next year, if you've got some folks who are interested in agribusiness or gardening or environmental studies, we would love to take a scholarship application from them. Right. So, I mean, I can do, people naively will tell me, oh, let's build a rain garden. And it's like, that's not going to do anything. It'd be nice in your yard, and it might help the little bit of runoff that you have in your yard, but the Jadwin floodplain is a big rain garden. That's exactly what it is. It is a ginormous retention, detention system.
Wow.
And the question would be, how can we take advantage of it? How could we determine if has it cleaned itself up over time? But when I was talking about that wish-washing, think of it like when you gargle, you swoosh around in your mouth and then you spit it out. Obviously some stuff leaves. Well, sort of, that's probably what's been going on with all that back and forth. And now that Velsicol not there, I mean, how long has this stuff stayed there? Is it deep in the soil or has it gone? And is there a way to reclaim and reuse some of that? I will send you the TDAC regulator and the city engineer's name. Those are two people that would be worth your students talking to. I'll try to send you some biographical stuff, some information.
Thank you.
There's a wonderful book. It's a big picture, but it's called Rising Tide. And it is the history of flood control along the Mississippi.
All right, Rising Tide. Okay,
Rising Tide, and it's phenomenal. It's the whole history. It's that whole question of, do we keep it in a levee or do we let it go out over the land? Gotcha. And how they got to that, and the development of the Corps of Engineers and all of that. And that's the other person, is maybe to see if I could locate the Corps of Engineer person. What the Corps does is they give the authority to the city.
Right.
So I'm not sure there's somebody local, but we'll see.
Well, I
Let me
appreciate
see.
your time. Oh, go ahead, Samuel. Go ahead. I mean, Braxton.
During one of our assignments, I actually looked into the specific issue of flooding, and there was one solution that I personally found. I just wanted to know if it was ever like discussed. Something that I found was the idea of permeable pavement.
Oh, you can use that. Here's the first thing to disabuse yourself of. It's always going to flood in that area. It's just always going to flood. Okay, it's designed to flood. It's supposed to flood. The question is, do you relocate homes if they're in dangerous areas? You know, what do you do and how do you live with that natural component? Permeable pavement is used. It allows water, instead of quickly running off the surface, it allows water to go down. If you go to the Botanic Gardens, if you go to Dixon, I think Lichterman's put it in, the zoo's putting it in. It's now being used in walk areas. It is not stable enough for driving. Lakeland did put it in a parking lot at their municipal center, at their city hall.
Yeah, that's what I was reading about in the article that I looked at for that specific issue.
Yeah,
That-
no,
that
it's definitely a practice that could be used.
Yeah, it said it could be up to like 40 miles per hour now, but not on highways or anything. So
Right.
more just like urban, like suburban areas.
Right. In Memphis, I think the engineers have gotten comfortable with the idea of parking pads and walkways in park areas.